Hay arrived expecting hell, hardened by war, conditioned for hatred. They stepped off those trains prepared for brutality or even death. They were the enemy, prisoners of war on American soil. But in the most unlikely of places, behind the barbed wire of a Colorado camp, they encounter a force so unexpected, so disarming, that it would shatter every belief they held about their captors and about themselves. This isn't just a war story. This is a story about the quiet, world-altering power of a simple human kindness. Before we witness the profound moments that change these men forever, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more hidden histories and inspiring stories like this one directly to you. The walls we build. The train car shuddered to a final, groaning halt. The inside was a sweltering tomb of sweat, fear, and unwashed bodies. Kenji Tanaka, once a proud infantryman of the Imperial Japanese Army, kept his eyes fixed on a sliver of blindingly bright world visible through the cracked door. His mind, a numb void after the long voyage and longer train ride, could only conjure one thought. What now? The doors screeched open. American MPs barked orders, their faces stern and unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. The prisoners, thin and exhausted, stumbled into the searing high-altitude sun of Colorado. Kenji's first breath was of dry, pine-scented air, so clean it felt sharp in his lungs. His eyes, adjusting to the light, took an impossible panorama of soaring, snow-capped mountains. It was beautiful, and then he saw the fence. Double layers of barbed wire, 10 feet high, glinted menacingly. Guard towers dotted the perimeter, the silhouettes of soldiers with rifles stark against the blue sky. Camp Greeley was its own stark, dusty world. The processing was efficient and cold. They were stripped, deloused, issued identical fatigues. The message was clear. You are a number now. You are a problem to be managed. Kenji's new home was Barrack 7, Bunk 14. The man in Bunk 13 was an older soldier, Isao Sato. He rarely spoke, his eyes holding a deep, weary sorrow. That first night, as a bitter cold seeped to the thin walls, a cold none of them prepared for, Kenji lay shivering, listening to the distant, unfamiliar sound of a coyote's cry. He thought of his family's warm kotatsu table in Kyoto, a memory that felt like it belonged to someone else. He built a wall around his heart then, brick by brick, steeling himself for the hardship he knew was coming. The Americans were their enemy. They had firebombed his cities. They had killed his friends. Kindness was not a weapon he expected to face. The next morning, the routine began. Roll call, a bland breakfast of porridge, then assigned labor details. Kenji's group was tasked with clearing rocks from a field. As they worked under the watchful eyes of the guards, a truck rumbled up to the camp's administrative building. 2 women stepped out. One was older with a stern, practical face. The other was younger, perhaps in her late 20s, with hair the color of wheat and eyes that seemed to hold the Colorado sky within them. She carried a stack of books and hesitated for a moment, her gaze sweeping across the work detail. The prisoners instinctively looked down, avoiding eye contact. Kenji risked a glance. She wasn't looking at them with the hatred he anticipated, nor with the fear he might have understood. Her expression was one of curiosity and something else he couldn't name. One of the guards, a Corporal Miller, joked loudly, "Don't you worry none, Miss Evans. They're harmless caged birds." The young woman, Miss Evans, simply nodded, a faint frown on her lips, and followed the older woman inside. Her brief, silent presence was a pebble dropped into the stagnant pond of the camp. For Kenji, it was the first crack in the wall he had so carefully built. Why was a woman here? And why did she look at them not as monsters, but as men? The language of a pastry. Days bled into weeks, a monotonous cycle of work, meals, and silence. The initial tension eased into a brittle, predictable routine. The prisoners kept to themselves, and the guards maintained their professional distance. The 2 women, who they learned were volunteers in the local town, came twice a week to help in the camp's fledgling library. One afternoon, a conflict erupted. A young, hot-headed prisoner named Akira, frustrated and humiliated after guards shoved him for moving too slowly, began shouting in Japanese. The guards, misunderstanding his outburst as the start of a riot, raised their rifles. Corporal Miller blew his whistle, his face red with alarm. In seconds, the yard was electric with panic and the potential for violence. It was Miss Evans who stepped between them. She had been carrying a box of donated books and simply walked right into the space between the raised rifles and the defiant Akira. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She looked at the senior American sergeant, her voice calm but firm. "It's a misunderstanding, Sergeant. Please lower your weapons. He's not threatening you. He's just angry." She then turned to the prisoners. Her Japanese was halting, painfully basic, but the effort was staggering. "Daijobu desu ka?" "Are you okay?" she asked Akira. The silence that followed was absolute. The rifles slowly lowered. Akira, stunned into silence, just stared at her. Kenji felt the ground shift beneath his feet. She had spoken their language. She had tried to understand. The following week, a new item appeared on the mess hall line, a small golden brown pastry beside the usual fare. The cook, a gruff man named Joe, grunted, "Apple turnover." The Red Cross ladies dropped him off. "Don't get used to it." For men surviving on stew and bread, it was an unimaginable luxury. Kenji took his back to his bunk, staring at it as if it were a foreign artifact. He took a small bite. The flavor exploded on his tongue. Sweet, buttery, spiced with cinnamon. It was the first truly pleasurable sensation he had experienced in years. It was a taste of a normal world, a civilized world, a world that, according to the woman who helped bring it, might still include men like him. That evening, he saw Miss Evans leaving the administration building. On an impulse he didn't understand, he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She paused, and then, after a moment's hesitation, returned the gesture. No smile, just a simple, silent acknowledgement of shared humanity. It was a revelation. The kindness wasn't a grand gesture. It was in the attempt to speak their language, in the gift of a simple pastry. The walls around Kenji's heart didn't just crack, they began to crumble. Who were these American women, and what did they want in return for these small, devastating acts of grace? The library of lost things. The incident in the yard and the mystery of the pastry changed the atmosphere of Camp Greeley. A cautious, fragile curiosity began to replace outright hostility. Kenji found himself volunteering for a new detail, organized in the camp's library. It was a small, dusty room, but it was warm and quiet. Miss Evans, Eleanor, he heard the other woman call her, was there, sorting through a new donation of books. She looked up as he entered, her expression wary but not unfriendly. "Hello," she said, her English clear and soft. Kenji bowed slightly. "Hello," he replied, the English word feeling clumsy in his mouth. Their work was silent at first, a careful dance around opposite sides of the room. The tension was a living thing. He was sorting through a box of novels when he froze. His hands trembled as he pulled out a tattered copy of The Tale of Genji. It was one of the most famous works of Japanese literature, a foundational text of his culture. Holding it here, in the sterile American room, felt like finding a piece of his own soul in a foreign land. He didn't realize he was crying until a tear splashed onto the cover. He quickly wiped his face, ashamed. Eleanor was watching him. She didn't approach, but her voice was gentle. "Is it a good book?" Kenji looked up, struggling for the words. "It is my country," he finally managed, placing a hand over his heart. Understanding dawned on her face. She walked to her desk and picked up a small, leather-bound notebook. She opened it, showed him a page. It was filled with Japanese characters, painstakingly written but full of errors. She was trying to learn. She pointed the book in his hand, then to her notebook, a question in her eyes. And so a bridge was built. In the quiet of the library, they began to teach each other. He helped her with her kanji, correcting her strokes. She taught him English words, explaining the stories of Hawthorne and Twain. They spoke of mundane things, the weather, the mountain view from the window, the books they loved. They never spoke of the war. One day, Kenji gathered his courage. "Why?" he asked, pointing from her to himself, encompassing the entire impossible situation. "Why you help us?" Eleanor put down her pen. She looked out the window for a long time. My brother, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. He was a Marine. He was killed on Tarawa. The air left Kenji's lungs. The revelation was a physical blow. Her brother had been killed by men like him. The enemy. She had every reason to hate him, to despise every man in this camp. Seeing his shock, she continued, her gaze steady. I hated you all for months, but the hate was a poison. It was killing me, not you. She gestured around the library. This, try to understand, it was the only antidote I could find. In that moment, Kenji understood. This was no naive kindness. This was a conscious, incredibly difficult choice. It was resilience. It was superhuman strength. Her kindness wasn't given because she had forgotten. It was given precisely because she remembered, and she had chosen to overcome. The revelation was more shocking than any act of cruelty could have been. The unbroken circle. News of the library exchanges spread, first as a rumor, then as a quiet inspiration. Other prisoners began to visit, tentatively at first, then with more purpose. They found books on agriculture, engineering, and art. Eleanor and the other volunteers began organizing more activities. A chess tournament, a baseball game between prisoners and guards, an art class using charcoal and scrap paper. Kenji, with his improving English, often acted as an interpreter. He saw the change in his comrades. The hollow-eyed despair began to lift, replaced by a flicker of engagement, of intellectual curiosity. Isao Sato, the silent man from the next bunk, surprised everyone by revealing a talent for sketching, producing delicate, breathtaking drawings of the mountain landscapes. The camp commandant, initially skeptical, saw these activities not as a security risk, but as a powerful tool for maintaining order and morale. He allowed a cultural exchange night to be organized. The gymnasium was packed. American guards and staff sat on one side, prisoners on the other. The air was thick with unspoken history and mutual apprehension. Kenji's heart hammered against his ribs. This could be a magnificent failure, a moment that highlighted their differences and reinforced their divisions. The prisoners went first. A small group performed a traditional folk dance, their movements precise and graceful. Another recited Basho's haiku. Then Isao Sato stood and shyly displayed his artwork, drawings not of Japan but of Colorado, of the very camp they were in. He saw the beauty in their prison, and in showing to their captors, he offered a gift of incredible forgiveness. Then it was the Americans' turn. A local woman played a folk song on the fiddle, and then Eleanor Evans stood up. She walked to the center of the floor, looking nervous but determined. She held a piece of paper. I have learned a poem, she said, her voice clear but accented. Then she began to recite in careful, deliberate Japanese. It was a famous poem about autumn, about loss and the enduring hope of spring. She stumbled over a few words, but her effort was perfect in its imperfection. When she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then, from the Japanese side of the room, Kenji slowly began to clap. Isao joined him. Then Akira. Then every prisoner was on their feet, not applauding, but offering a deep, respectful bow. On the American side, the guards and staff, moved by a profound display, rose to their feet and applauded. There were no translators needed in that moment. The language was universal. The walls were gone. The war ended. The gates of Camp Greeley were opened. As the prisoners prepared to board the ships back to Japan, there were no grand farewells, but there were small, significant ones. Kenji approached Eleanor one last time. Thank you, he said, his English now confident. You taught me everything. She smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her sky-blue eyes. No, she said, we taught each other. Years later, Kenji Tanaka, now a successful architect helping to rebuild his country, would receive a small package from America. Inside was a book, Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. Inscribed on the first page was a note from my teacher. The circle remains unbroken. Eleanor, he would open it to a marked passage. I am large, I contain multitudes. He understood. They had not been just soldiers and prisoners, captors and captives. They had been men and women who had chosen, in a world shattered by hate, to look for a common thread of humanity. And in finding it, they had found a way to heal themselves and, in their own small way, heal a broken world. Their story was a quiet testament to a simple, revolutionary truth, that the greatest battles are not always fought with weapons, but are won with kindness, one brave, unexpected moment at a time.